Just lastly, what's your view on the global outlook for 2014, this year? What are you expecting to see as you go to bed at night? You typically wake up in the morning and looking at the markets.
So I learned from years of managing so many sophisticated economists. There are about 6 or 7 indicators that I track, not least because I helped develop some proprietary ones.
Right.
And I think they're really, really useful for telling you what's going on in the world now.
Yes.
So the Korean trade data, for example, Korea is the fastest country in the world to report its trade data. On the 1st of April, they will report their March trade data.
Okay.
Korea doesn't trade with Jupiter. Right. So that's really powerful information.
Indeed.
Secondly, the weekly job claims in the United States. It's a really good leading indicator of unemployment, and it's actually a really, oddly, statistical good leading indicator of the US stock market. Okay. And there's 4 or 5 other things. I'm not going to say them all because I have to put them out in my next book.
Sure, not a worry.
No,
we're by the book.
I'm joking. So when I look at all the latest ones of those that I've seen, as I do every month, I say the world's doing okay.
Okay.
It's not doing...
Better or worse than last year?
It's about the same. But what is interesting is that the so-called developed world is generally doing better.
Right.
But against that, of course, China's slowing down. And China's weight is so big, it kind of offsets the improvement in the developed world. So it's kind of about the same.
When do you see the recession sort of heading in the right direction? In other words, out of the recession?
Well, I would add, I think we are in the right direction. What a lot of my contemporaries greatly underestimate, and I'm glad you asked me, is on one level, the whole global credit crisis was all about America not saving anything and China saving too much.
Right.
And the rest of the world lives off those 2 cylinders. So this decade is sort of all about the US and China swapping places with each other. And one way of measuring that is what's going on with their balance of payments. Today, the US current account deficit is close to 2% of GDP. Now, somebody that's been stooped in 35 years of foreign exchange, that's close to a minor miracle. And China's surplus is 1/3 of what it was also before the crisis. So there's a lot of adjustment going on. So the fact that both places are coming out of this mess in a somewhat different structural shape than before, I think mitigates for the fact that the recovery is not as strong as people might have hoped for, because we don't want them to recover in the same way they were, because that's what caused the problem.
Right.
So structurally, I find myself generally a lot more optimistic for the world than virtually anybody I speak to.
But has anything really changed? Someone once said, ask a banker, and a banker will say, no, we're coming out of it, it's all being worked through. And then the person retorted and said, how can you say that it's all okay when you have such violent peaks and troughs that cause these issues? Have we dealt with the violent prospect of peaks and troughs?
People have got to be realistic. I'd say 3 things about that. First of all, as I've said, greed and fear are close cousins. And you are always going to have some kind of crises. And it's not bankers or anybody else that's causing them, it's human beings.
Yeah.
Because people think something that seems good will go on forever. So the next lunatic gets involved and we get to finally the point where there's no one left.
Sure.
And that's how you have a crisis.
Yeah.
And so there's point number 1. And that's fact. And if policymakers try to tell all your listeners or viewers that that's never going to happen again, I would say don't listen to them, because it's reality.
Sure.
The second thing linked to that, we need to have policymakers that don't have a regulatory environment trying to fight yesterday's battles. So force bankers to take away the punch bowl. The famous Citibank CEO comment, we danced to the last record, or whatever it was, something a little bit more subtle than that. If bankers can't do that. I mean, I've worked in the industry a long time, and you always, particularly those lend money, think this time it's different.
Right.
But so you've got to put in a regulatory environment where they don't control that.
Sure.
So you make counter-cyclical regulatory policy, and that's the way to try and deal with that.
Right.
Third thing I would say, which goes to my optimism, China is bigger than Germany, France, and Italy put together. The 4 BRIC countries are nearly as big as the US. If these guys carry on doing vaguely what they're doing, the world economy this decade will grow by more than it has the last 3. And most people don't realise that because they don't understand how the world economy
But will
links.
the recognition about the global influence accord to to that underlying point that you've just made?
Well, I would say after 2015 and this thing about the SDR,
right.
if China's not getting more involved, I would worry that we've got stuck in a world where governance is so Western dominated and economically it's not so important.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.